Hello everyone and welcome to yet another very special Q30 Sports Update. I'm Jon Alba, the Associate Sports Director of Q30 Television. And ladies and gentlemen, the playoffs, they are a-starting and let the good times roll. Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about today about men's basketball, women's basketball, and the #1 team in the country, the men's hockey team. And I'm very privileged to be joined today by two esteemed analysts. To my left, Mr. Jordan Katz. Jordan, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
You're welcome. And anyway, over to my right, Mark Spillane.
Good to be here as always.
And Mark's going to talk some hockey. Jordan's going to talk some basketball. When all is said and done, we're going to have a little bit of a debate. And I know that both of these guys have no issues debating whatsoever.
No, not at all.
So I'm excited to get into that portion. But first, we have to go through the logistics. So let's start with the men's basketball team. Men's basketball heads to LIU on Wednesday night. The #3 seeded Blackbirds versus the #6 seeded Quinnipiac Bobcats. They're the #6 seed for a reason. You want to talk a little bit about that?
John, they started the conference schedule off poorly. They were 1-3 in conference. They then went 10-4 to finish with 11-7, which is a pretty good record. But with the NEC top portion of the conference being so good this year, it had them finishing 6th, and losing 2 out of your last 3 just didn't help. It didn't help in the matter. They now have to go to LIU after losing at LIU 96-90 over the weekend. This is a very tall order for this team. This is a Blackbird squad that has one of the best players in the NEC in Jamal Alba, who dominated Quinnipiac this past weekend. It's going to be a very interesting matchup for this team.
How did the Bobcats stop Alba?
I don't know if you can really stop him, but there's a better way to contain him than they did. They allowed him to have too many uncontested mid-range jump shots. They allowed him to get low post position. That's not what you can do. You have to rotate your coverage to Jamal Alba, where essentially what you're doing is you're taking your players in a man-to-man defense that are up higher guarding the guards, and you're moving them down, and then you're going to rotate off the ball. So if Jamal Alba posts up on the left block or he winds up on the left wing, you're going to try to double down, force him to pass, and then rotate and cover the shooters. And when they do that, they actually managed to beat the Blackbirds, which they were able to do without Alba earlier in the year, but the concept is still the same.
Absolutely. So, Mark, let's head over to you now. The men's ice hockey team, they're the only hockey team left playing right now. The women's team had an early exit in the ECAC playoffs, rather. Talk a little bit about the road that this men's hockey team has taken to get to this point.
Well, I mean, it all started off a little bit rocky. They got off to a little bit of a rough start in the beginning of the year, John. Everybody was kind of worried that they weren't going to have the season we expected, especially after that loss to American International College. They lost that game on election night back in November, and everybody was livid. Everyone was angry. And then all they did after that was go 21 games in a row without losing again. So they've kind of established themselves as a pretty good hockey team, I'd say.
Probably didn't help that they were giving out that promotional tickets on election day.
Yeah, if you voted, you were able to get in for free, I remember.
Well, that's America at its finest. But anyway, let's head back over to basketball, because unlike hockey, there's actually 2 teams left playing. One is a little more efficient, I guess we could say, than the other, and that would be the women's basketball team, now ranked #8 in the collegeinsider.com mid-major top 25 poll. This team, Jordan, they find themselves the #1 seed in the NEC playoffs, undefeated, 18-0 in conference play, just the 4th team to ever do that at 18-0 in the NEC, 27-2 overall. What did they do right this year?
Well, we could start with what they did wrong, and that's sufficiently 0. They didn't do anything wrong. What they did right, they did an excellent job of sharing the ball. They're 11th in the country in assists per game. That's a phenomenal number. Point guard Abshire has had a phenomenal year. Jasmine Martin's been great. Felicia Barron's been great. This team does a lot right on offense. It equates to their top 30 in the country in points per game, in scoring margin, and in three-pointers made. They do an excellent job on the defensive side of the ball. 9th in the country in steals, 2nd as a result in turnover margin. John, they don't do much wrong. And it really started with that marquee win against St. John's. That was a big deal for this team, and it really stemmed the rest of their season.
Well, Jordan, they're facing Bryant in the first round of the Northeast Conference tournament. What are they going to have to do in this matchup?
The same thing they've been doing all year, sticking to the same strategy. They do an excellent job in the second half of really running teams out of the gym, for lack of a better term. They're phenomenal on the offensive side of the floor. They force teams into a ton of turnovers defensively. Bryan is going to have to do a really good job of keeping possession of the basketball. If they don't, this game's going to be a struggle for them. You can't let the Bobcats get out in transition. They will beat you. And it's one of the reasons why they are poised for a first-round upset in the NCAAs, is they run in transition as well as anybody at this level. And it's one of the reasons why they can pull off an upset. When you look at the lower seeds that pull off an upset in the NCAA tournament, they have two common factors. One of them is the fact that they play great defense. VCU, when they go to the Final Four for the men team, they play fantastic defense. Marist has prided themselves on the women's side this time. Marist has prided themselves on great defense. They had a Sweet 16 run a couple of years ago. This Bobcat team plays excellent defense, and they can get out in transition, and that's a recipe for success in the NCAAs.
Now, Mark, a lot of people may not understand how the ECAC playoffs work per se, or in general how the collegiate hockey playoffs work. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, John, for the ECAC playoffs, all 12 teams make it in. The top 4 secure a bye. That would be Quinnipiac, that would be Union, Yale, and I believe RPI as well. So those 4 teams are off for the first weekend. So they don't have anything to do this weekend but sit back, relax, watch the other teams play. That means the top 4 right behind them will play the bottom 4. And then they will have a 3-game series this weekend and move on to the quarterfinals, which will be in 2 weeks, where Quinnipiac will host a quarterfinal series right here in Hampton.
So that's a quick little breakdown about how that will work per se. Is the Frozen Four a legitimate possibility for this team?
This is a legitimate possibility that the Quinnpiac Bobcats men's ice hockey team could make it to the Frozen Four, and here's why. They have a fairly weak bracket as of right now, according to the latest bracketology released on USCHO.com. Right now, they are the top-ranked team. They're going to be playing in Providence as the #1 overall seed, and it looks like they're going to be playing Alaska, the #16 overall seed. After that, Yale and Minnesota State are the other 2 in their region. If Yale pulls that upset, the Bobcats would be major favorites to make it to the Frozen Four. Even if Yale doesn't pull the upset and plays Minnesota State and loses, the Bobcats have a very good chance to beat Minnesota State.
Okay, well, Jordan, before we head to the women's basketball section of this program, let's finish up about the men. Do they go into LIU Brooklyn and come away with a victory and move on to the semifinals, or will this be the end of the line for Dave Johnson, Garvey Young, and Jamie Jackson?
I think they're actually going to pull an upset. There's 2 reasons why I think this is going to happen. Number one is it took 96 points by the Blackbirds. It took a monstrous second half for the Blackbirds to be able to beat this Bobcat team. That's not going to happen again. The Blackbirds are not scoring 60-plus points in a half and shooting the lights out the way they did. And Jamal Osware is not going off for 35 points again. It's not going to happen. This Bobcat team is a very good road team come NEC tournament time, no matter what they've done in the regular season. They're great on the road. They always have been. And this is a spot where they could pull an upset led by their defense. And if they were able to make their open 3-point jump shots, it's not a strength of this team, but it really opens up their low post players like Azatam, Jamie Jackson, Noose Mondrame. If they can get one-on-one matchups for those 2, they were not able to despite the 90 points that they scored this past weekend. If they're able to slow the game down and get one-on-one matchups, that's a way for them to win this game, and I think they're going to be able to do it.
Where does the line end for them?
I think the line will end in the next round. I think they'll be able to pull an upset, but I don't see them being able to beat one of the top teams in the conference, no matter who they draw, whether it's Robert Morris or Bryan or Wagner. I don't see that happening.
The NEC is wide open this year. Everyone is well aware of that. So let's keep things wide open between all of us. And let's get down to a little bit of debating, okay? So one of the main themes of both of these squads is the depth that they possess. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you, which of these teams is better suited with their depth? And let's start with Jordan.
There's no question here. It's the women's basketball team. I mean, there's no argument. This is a team where if you look at their per 40-minute averages, they're absurd. Maria Napolitano's 3rd on the team in points per game if you extend everyone's minutes to 40 minutes a game, which is the maximum amount of minutes you can play. Lisa Liebeck would wind up being 2nd on the team in assists and steals among active players. Sam Guastella is averaging a double-double in this case, and she's coming off the bench. They run 2 lines. They run 2 lines in basketball. They go 11 players deep. It's like they have a second line in hockey. It's ridiculous to watch. There's no question here, Mark. It's women's basketball.
Okay, so 11 players deep. I'll raise you 10 on that. 24 players have seen action for the Bobcats this year. 21 of them have registered a point, and 18 have scored a goal. None of those guys are in the top 50 in scoring in the entire nation. They rely on depth to score and to win.
But what about when those players are in the top players in the nation, much like the Quinnipiac Bobcats have right now?
I think, look, there's a ton of depth on this men's ice hockey team. It's made them so successful. The ability to run 4 lines, not only that, the forechecking from lines 3 and 4 that we've watched over the course of this season is terrific. This women's basketball team is something like we've never seen before. The ability to just rotate in players and have them produce to the same level of opposing team starters. That's something that just is not done in the NCAA, in NCAA Division I. You mentioned the point mark for the men's hockey team. Well, let me give you a stat for the women's team. The women's team put up 39 points against Monmouth, the women's basketball bench. 39 points. They almost outscored the starters. That's a remarkable mark. That's something that just doesn't happen.
What do you think, Mark?
That is something that just doesn't happen. I have to give you that. But again, this team relies on all 4 lines. You mentioned it. They're not a top-line dominant team. They don't have Corbin Knight, plays for North Dakota. They don't have Johnny Gaudreau, plays for BC. They have Jeremy Langlois as their top scorer, and he is by no means a Hobie Baker candidate. They rely on everybody top to bottom getting it done with defense, forechecking, as you mentioned, scoring throughout. That's why they're the number 1 team in the nation for a reason. It's not just because they have stars. If there's any reason why they are the top team, besides Eric Hartzell, it is the depth of scoring.
Last point I want to make, you mentioned the Hobie Baker and how Langlois is not in the conversation. Well, there's one person on this team that is in the conversation for Hobie Baker. That's Eric Hartzell. There is no one in the conversation of anywhere in the vicinity of a best player in the country on this Quinnipiac Bobcat roster, but yet they still find ways to do what they do.
Both teams led by great coaches. Let me ask you this one. Which coach do you feel has done the best job this season with their given squad? Let's start with Mark.
Now, that's a very good question, and I know an argument can be made for both teams, but I'm going to have to argue for Rand Pecknold. Everybody came into this year expecting the Bobcats to maybe make top 4 in their conference, what is known as probably the 2nd weakest conference in the nation. Everybody said, well, if they can get a top 4 and they can get a first-round bye in the ECAC, they'll be doing a good job. Then all of a sudden they climb up, they're undefeated halfway through conference play in the ECAC, and everybody's saying, okay, they're probably going to spiral out of control. Maybe they can hold on to a top 4 spot. Next thing you know, he keeps them on track. They win they go unbeaten 21 games in a row, and they're the top team in the nation. Then they lose, face a little adversity. What does he do? Straightens them out, makes them clean the bleachers at the High Point Solutions Arena. They get right back to it, win a couple more games, get back to the top spot, stay there for 3 weeks in a row.
I agree with you, but I like to argue counterpoint, so I'm going to argue counterpoint and play devil's advocate. Trish Fabry has a team undefeated in NEC conference play. Undefeated. They haven't lost. They haven't lost since Georgia Tech, which was a game that they were supposed to lose in a tournament during the regular season down south. This is a team that is not only poised to win the NEC championship, but this is a team poised to win an NCAA tournament game. And that would be a first in Bobcat history, and it would be a first just to get there. I understand the job that Rand Pecknold has done, and it's been tremendous. But Trish Fabry has been able to maximize talent from 1 to 12 on the roster. Sam Guastella was hurt. She's mentioned this over and over again, what a tribute it is to their bench for being able to just miss Sam Guastella, and it didn't matter. It didn't make a difference. That's the equivalent of Jeremy Langlois on that second line going down and the Bobcats being able to not skip a beat. The coaching job and the improvement that Trish Fabry has been able to have on this team is the reason why she's the better coach.
Don't forget, after the end of last season for the women's basketball team, after they lost to Monmouth at home, Tricia Fabry said, we'll be back. And maybe that's exactly where this team will find themselves. Now, I got 2 more for you guys here, okay? First off, we're going to talk about expectations. The women's basketball team, they came into the season with the expectation that they were going to go into the Northeast Conference Championship game and get to the NCAA tournament. At this point in the season with the men's ice hockey team, they expect to be in the Frozen Four, maybe even take home a national championship. Gentlemen, my question to you now, and I'll throw this open to whichever one of you wants to start, which of these teams is more likely to exceed or match their expectations?
Go ahead, George.
It's women's basketball. This is very simple. This is a team that's going to, by all accounts, probably win the NEC tournament in the postseason, finishing with a record unbeaten in the regular season and in the postseason, and wind up in the NCAA tournament. That was their expectation. They're going to do that. End of story.
Well, the expectation for the Quinnipiac men's ice hockey team right now is to win the conference. They most certainly should win this conference. Then it's to probably get through both first-round games and move into the Frozen Four. And there's no reason why they can't do that. I mentioned that Yale's in their bracket, Alaska's in their bracket, Minnesota State's in their bracket. The Mavericks are going to be the toughest team to beat. But there's no reason why they can't do that. I think the Quinnipiac men's ice hockey team reaches the Frozen Four and matches the expectations that everybody set out for
Here's
them.
the problem. There are too many ways for this to go wrong for the men's team. This men's team could draw Cornell in the second round and lose. This team could drop with that loss if Boston College runs the table. There are a lot of things that can go wrong. For this women's team, even if they lose after playing Bryant, because we all expect them to beat Bryant, if they lose after beating Bryant, guess what? They still probably wind up as an at-large bid. And that still has them in the NCAA tournament, and that's still their goal. The big thing here is that the women's basketball team does not have to win an NCAA tournament game, whereas the men's hockey team, in my opinion, does.
They probably do, and again, I don't see any reason why they can't. But you mentioned that if they get that at-large bid to being the women's basketball team, they would still reach their expectations. I don't see how that's possible at all. A team that runs the table in their conference, goes 17-0, I believe the record is, and then they lose in the conference tournament, even before the championship game, I feel like that wouldn't be meeting expectations, where I think the Bobcats, as a hockey team, you know as well as I do that any one bounce in a hockey game can completely alter the result. And if that happens, people will say, okay, it's a hockey game, that's what happens. They'll jump right back into it and go after it in the NCAA.
Look at Ferris State, though, last year. Ferris State last year plays in their conference tournament, ranked second. They drop all the way to 8th. That could happen for the Bobcats. And are the Bobcats able to make a run after that?
Well, let me just say something about Ferris State. You're right. That's exactly what happened last year. They're the top team out there in the CCHA. They went down, dropped all the way to 8th in the national rankings. What did they do? They turned around. They went right to the national championship game before they lost to Boston College, going right through ECAC conference opponent for the Bobcats in Union.
And keep this in mind, guys. There is so much parity right now in men's hockey. This Quinnipiac Bobcats team lost some pretty easy letdown games, people would say, but then their competition lost as well.
Well, we've been talking about that. We said it's not like last year where Boston College was just expected to win. Anyone can win in men's hockey, and that is a real reason why this team could wind up in the Frozen Four.
Could wind up in the Frozen Four, could wind up losing first round. Anything is possible in collegiate sports. So with that being said, I ask you my final question here. It's been a question that's been discussed throughout athletics here and throughout the media circuit between students. Plus or minus 1.5 wins for Quinnipiac athletics in an NCAA tournament game or games this year. Mark, start with you.
Plus, absolute plus. I know the women's basketball team has a little bit of a tough time trying to win a game in the NCAA tournament, provided that they make it there this year, because they're going to be playing as a major underdog against whoever they're playing against. But there's no reason why, if they can't pull an upset, that this Bobcats men's ice hockey team can't win 2 or 3, maybe even 4, and win the whole thing. There's no reason why they can't win their bracket, find themselves in the Frozen Four, and that would already be over the 1.5 mark you've set, Jon.
Under. I would love for there to be 2 tournament wins. Essentially what the question asks is do you see the men's team making men's basketball team making a miraculous run, sneaking into a play-in game and winning? Do you see the women's team pulling an upset? Currently they're projected to play UCLA. UCLA plays phenomenal defense and hasn't lost to a team, I believe, that's ranked outside of the top 6 in the recent 2 months. Or do you see this men's team making the Frozen Four? To me, I don't see either. I see the women's team giving a good run, but coming up just short as a 13, maybe a 12 seed. I see the men's team winding up losing again in the ECAC play, which means I think they'll fall to 4 or 5. I think they'll win a first-round game. I think they'll drop the second-round game because they'll have to go out west. If Boston College wins, Boston College goes to Providence. They win the American East, which means Quinnipiac goes out west. I don't know if it happens. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it.
Now, let me make
I don't know if it happens.
You're being a little pessimistic, Jordan. I think we got to spice things up.
I'm a Met fan, I'm a Jet fan, I'm a Knick fan, okay? Pessimistic comes with the territory.
Okay, well, we're going to be a little more optimistic here. I don't think the Bobcats, a hockey team, loses in the ECAC. I think they win the ECAC this year. They're going to beat Cornell in the second round, that's the team I believe they're going to play, because I think Cornell's going to upset Princeton and be the lowest seed coming in. They're going to beat Cornell, and when it comes down to Atlantic City, when they get to that semifinal game, they're going to know it's all on the line. They're going to be focused. Those defensive mistakes we've seen, those turnovers we've seen, they're not going to be there. This team knows that they're better than everybody else.
More importantly, if they go to Atlantic City, there's a great chance that they don't fall past that mark that I'm projecting. If they wind up going to Atlantic City, there's a good chance that maybe Minnesota already dropped 2 games they're not supposed to. Minnesota's been inconsistent this year.
The last thing I want to say is, of all the teams playing college hockey right now, of the 16 that are going to make the NCAA tournament, the Quinnipiac Bobcats have more to prove than everybody else.
Absolutely. Think about what an NCAA tournament win would do for a school of this caliber, especially in the case of basketball moving into the MAC next year, and for hockey in terms of gaining national respect. The matchup between Quinnipiac and Yale that was on NBC Sports Network drew just 38,000 people. The game that followed it between North Dakota and Denver, more than doubled that. So a win for the Quinnipiac University men's hockey team, respect. A win for the Quinnipiac women's basketball team, step towards a new conference. It'll be an interesting story to watch unfold, but you can check out more from Q30 Sports online on YouTube. Search Q30 TV and follow us on Twitter at Q30 Sports. You can find Mark Spillane on Twitter at mspillane9, and this fellow, the Professor Jordan Katz, on Twitter at JordanKatz11. My name is Jon Alba. That's Mark Spillane. That's Jordan Katz. Once again, don't forget, check us out on www.q30.org. We'll see you later on.